What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with the second part of the video that we did yesterday. We're talking about some boomer bust players today. We're talking risky players, some guys with high risk, low floors. And today we're going to be covering the pass catchers, the wide receivers, and the tight ends. Yesterday we talked about quarterbacks and running backs. So if you haven't already seen that video, go back and check that one out. But we're going to be talking about 5 pass catchers, 1 tight end, and 4 wide receivers today. If you haven't already done so, of course, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, comment any of your thoughts down below. We are on the road to 5,000 subscribers. We are hoping to get there by August 1st. So we got less than a month to get there. So if you haven't already done so, as always, go subscribe to the channel. Danny, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And yeah, if you guys are watching this video, it'll be released a day after we talked about quarterbacks and running backs. But guess what? We know the boom bust phrase, and it usually always applies to these pass catchers. It applies to these receivers, guys that'll give you weeks that'll win you your week, the guys that'll soak your lineup up completely when they have a goose egg. We'll cover all that and more today and talk about really some guys that, in general, not only from a week-to-week basis, but from a season-long basis that could either win you your league or potentially sink in your lineup. So anyways, I'm fired up. As you guys can tell, just have my coffee ready to fucking roll, baby.
All right, let's hit the intro and we'll get into the first guy.
All right, so let's start off with the first boom bust pass catcher of the video, and that's going to be Ja'Marr Chase, wide receiver of the Cincinnati Bengals, currently going off the board as the wide receiver 22 overall, or wide receiver 22, 47th overall. And you guys should see on the screen the current range of receivers he's going around. You got the likes of Adam Thielen, Tyler Lockett, who we're going to discuss in a bit, Cooper Kupp, Kenny Golladay, Deontay Johnson, etc. on that list. At his current ADP, you're basically fully banking on this offense taking that step towards a high-powered passing offense this year. And it's in the range of possibilities. We saw what this offense based around Joe Burrow, Justin Jefferson, and Ja'Marr Chase was able to do at LSU. Well, guess what? They got 2 of those 3 guys now, in addition to guys like T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and Joe Mixon on this offense. If these guys are on and these guys are clicking, we could be talking about one of the most ascending offenses in the league. You guys would have seen the video we recorded with Ian Hartitz, where this was his pick for one of his favorite offenses to target. However, the downside is there. We're taking a guy who the cliche argument is going to be, he's never played a snap. That's not what I'm going to argue today. The argument I'm going to be making is that he didn't play in 2020. Joe Burrow's coming off a significant knee injury, and he's in a loaded wide receiver room with guys that have shown to be productive in the NFL in recent years, with T. Higgins, who had a near 1,000-yard season last year as a rookie, and Tyler Boyd, who's been one of the most automatic slot receivers in the entire league. There's no denying the talent with Ja'Marr Chase or the upside here, but the floor is pretty low if he doesn't get 110, 120 targets right out of the gate. If we're talking about a rookie season where he has 90 targets, 95 targets, is he really going to return on value? That is the question. And I feel like a lot of our expectations have been risen. I know we've been talking about this pre-show, me and Corey. But if Justin Jefferson last year didn't come out and have 1,400 yards, didn't come out and have one of the best rookie seasons of all time, are we really taking Ja'Marr Chase in the 4th round? I think that his ADP's been boosted because people saw, okay, this was a 1,700-yard, 20-touchdown wide receiver when he was on the field with Justin Jefferson, actually outproduced Justin Jefferson. So in the back of people's minds are, if he outplayed Justin Jefferson, is it in the range of possibilities where we could be talking about the next Julio Jones, the next Odell Beckham, the next type of generational type of wide receiver? We're yet to see. But at his current ADP, you're basically banking on him having one of the better rookie seasons of all time.
Right. And it's such I wish we didn't have to make this argument, right? It annoys the shit out of me that we're drafting him at his ceiling. It's like, no, we're not actually drafting him at his ceiling. His range of outcomes is a top 5 wide receiver on the season. So he has plenty of ground that he can make up. It's just that the risk is really not baked into his ADP, right? Because like Danny just said, if Justin Jefferson doesn't come out and have one of the best rookie seasons of all time, is Ja'Marr Chase a 6th, 7th round pick like Devontae Smith? Like, that's my opinion on the situation. We're only picking Ja'Marr Chase in the 4th, 5th round because Justin Jefferson was so good last year. And that's not fair to Ja'Marr Chase, right? Like, that's very high expectations we're putting on Ja'Marr Chase as a rookie. And Could he meet those expectations? Absolutely, he could meet those expectations. But that's what makes him boomer bust, right? Because if he doesn't meet those expectations, the bust factor is going to be amplified even more because we saw what his teammate did last year.
Yep, absolutely. So we love the talent of Jamar Chase. And again, the upside is undeniable. But as Corey just mentioned, the floor is lower than people want to admit because, again, we're still talking about a rookie. We're still talking about a wide receiver room that is crowded. We're still talking about a quarterback coming off a significant knee injury. Maybe that offense isn't necessarily up to par within the first few weeks. We've yet to see. With that being said, fourth round is a little bit of a steep price to pay, but it's definitely justified given the fact that what we were able to see at LSU and what we're able to project going forward. So anyways, let's get into the next situation, and we're going to combine these next two players side by side because guess what? They play in the same freaking offense, baby. Started off with DK Metcalf, wide receiver from the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah, and these Seahawks receivers, man, it's no secret that Tyler Lockett's the boomer bust guy, right? Because every analysts and their mothers talking about how he got all his production in 3 games or whatever, but DK Metcalf was no different. Wide receiver 6 right now in ADP, 22nd pick overall off the board per Underdog drafts. We've seen this guy already be boomer bust, right? On a weekly basis last year, he was a boomer bust player, and most receivers are. So I'm not holding it against him completely, but last season, Russell Wilson averaged over 37 pass attempts per game in the first 8 weeks of the season. You guys can see DK Metcalf splits in those first 8 games of the season. And he averaged 32 pass attempts in the final 8 weeks of the season. And we already know that 32 pass attempt number is probably the more likely one that we're going to see next year, given the fact that Russell Wilson had the highest pass attempts of his career last year. And we all wanted to see Russ cook, but he only got to cook for the first 8 weeks of the season. And the Seahawks promptly fired their offensive coordinator, Brian Schottenheimer, after the season was over, citing philosophical differences, right? And we all know what that means. Pete Carroll wants to set the freaking tone and run the ball, right? Like that's what that means. He wants to run the ball more. He doesn't care that he has, 2 great wide receivers. They drafted another wide receiver in the second round this past year. They're going to have big games. I'm not denying the fact that they have high ceilings. It's very obvious that they have high ceilings because their quarterback is super efficient. He's been one of the most efficient quarterbacks in NFL history, to be honest, in fantasy football history over the course of his career. Russell Wilson is going to overcome the low volume because he always does. But the problem is where DK Metcalf specifically is being drafted, I cannot specifically draft this guy. I can't feasibly draft this guy over guys that have the high ceiling that DK Metcalf has, but they also have way more target projection, target floor, and their offenses are going to pass the ball way more than DK Metcalf is.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm going to make the same argument when it comes to Tyler Lockett. When we're talking about DK Metcalf, the common counter argument would be the fact that the strength of schedule against opposing secondaries over those last 8 weeks was tremendously hard. We're talking about the Rams a couple times, who were the number 1 unit against opposing wide receivers. Talking about, I believe it was the Giants mix in there.
Washington football team, they played as well.
Yeah, basically the only games where he absolutely did not play a stingy pass defense were the games that he blew up. We're talking about the game against the Eagles where, everybody knows and their mother knows by now that DK Metcalf absolutely torched the Eagles, and that was his biggest game of the second half of the year. So I've already talked about that fully in depth. You guys want more information on that, check out our rankings video where I basically broke down that second half of the schedule and why I do think with better matchup luck, he can probably get back to the case. But yeah, absolutely. Where he's currently going off the board, wide receiver 6, you are baking in no risk. You're basically saying, okay, this is going to be the DK Metcalf from the first 8 weeks of the season. And if he isn't, guess what? You just spent early third, late second round pick on a guy that is probably going to end up finishing as a top 10 overall wide receiver. But the road to get there is just going to be such a headache.
Right, exactly. And if you guys recall the league-winning wide receivers video that I made, you guys will remember that DK Metcalf fit in the boomer bust category. He had orange on his category, which meant that he was a boomer bust option, and that's exactly why I picked him for this video, because when we look at his overall factors of his situation, we can see that the offensive rank in points per game will be there, right? They're going to be probably a top 10, top 12, top 15 scoring offense at minimum. We have his quarterback's going to rank very highly in quarterback rating. We have no concerns about Russell Wilson, but the volume concerns that we have, team pass attempts, there's no way that they get to 600 pass attempts, even in a 17-game season. Highest targeted secondary option, Tyler Lockett, I expect to have much more than 105 targets on the season. Offensive line rank and pass blocking, they didn't add anybody to their offensive line, still terrible. Rank in yards per route run, DK Metcalf's a super talented player, right? He's going to make up for it with his own ability, but the targets aren't going to be 10.9 per game, not even close. Receptions, not even close to 7 per game. and and DK Metcalf's volume in a touchdown perspective is going to be where it needs to be, but he really needs elite efficiency to overcome some of the situational factors that he has, and he has the ability to do that. But that's the boom. That's like, right, we're not baking in if he has average efficiency comparative to Russell Wilson standards, then he's going to disappoint people, right? He's not going to finish as a top 10 wide receiver. And if he does, it's going to be very boom or bust like it was last year towards the back half of the season. And worst case scenario for DK Metcalf, he's like wide receiver 18 in points per game. And he kills you 12 games out of the year that you put him in your lineup.
Yep, absolutely. So that being said, with DK, I think we pretty much summed up the situation, which I'm just going to tag Tyler Lockett into that as well. You mentioned the league-winning wide receiver kind of checklist that you made. And as you guys can see, Tyler Lockett was another one of the failures in that regard. Talking about targets, receptions, touchdowns is the only one in yellow of the overall statistical standards that he can get to reach that plateau. But when you're talking about the situation, offensive ranking points per game and quarterback ranking QBR are the only things holding him up. Team pass attempts, not going to be there. You mentioned the team's going to set the tone a lot more this year, as they showed the second half of the season. A decrease in 5 passing attempts per game is significant. And Pete Carroll has shown that despite Russell Wilson being maybe arguably a top 3 quarterback of the last decade in the NFL, he just doesn't want to let Russ cook for the majority of the season, which is pretty sad. But at the same time, you have to expect that when you're banking into these Seahawks pass catching options. Offensive line rank and pass blocking, let's be honest here, that offensive line is absolutely porous, and Russell Wilson has still been able to do magic even with that being the case. And ranking yards per route run, we've yet to see kind of what Tyler Lockett is going to be able to do. We'd assume he probably has a good shot at getting there, considering the fact that this team is going to be so efficient from a passing game perspective while lacking the volume. But if we're talking about a guy in Tyler Lockett who last year, you guys can see the splits on the screen, his 3 of the 5 games he spent on the year with double-digit fantasy points in PPR happened in the first 3 games of the season. 11 of his final 13 games last year, he had less than double-digit fantasy points. And yes, mixed into there was, a 46-point outing against the Arizona Cardinals. Cool. If you had him in your DFS lineup that week, by all means, you probably won $1 million fucking dollars. But let's be honest here. If you had him in redraft, that wide receiver 2 kind of expectation that you're taking Tyler Lockett at, currently going off the board as a wide receiver 20, he just was not meeting that standard for 85% of the year. Is that really a guy you want to be taking in the 6th round of your fantasy drafts? I don't know. I mean, the upside is undeniable. Maybe we can see more consistency across a season because his snap percentage and his overall target share on the team was there. We're still talking about a low volume passing offense, the number 2 in that role, and a guy that has shown is an inconsistent option on a week-to-week basis. So when we're talking about Tyler Lockett, where he's currently going, give me a lot more stable options comparatively at that 6th, 7th round area.
You said 6th, 7th round. You see his ADP, right? 45th overall. That ain't 6th, 7th round, dude. That's late 3rd round, early 4th. Like, that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a guy that is an inconsistent wide receiver 3 flex option. We're talking about a guy that you have to take as your wide receiver 2. Right? You have to take this guy as your wide receiver 2, and you're not getting you're getting wide receiver 2 production by the end of the season, most likely. But on a week-to-week basis, you can't rely on this dude. And that's just the overlying theme with this entire offense, is that Metcalf's going to be inconsistent. Tyler Lockett's going to be even more inconsistent. And the fact that you have to take these guys where they're currently going over some options that are going to give you that weekly ceiling and also be more consistent is why I can't justify taking them at their current prices.
Absolutely. And the funniest thing about that is I thought it said 65th overall. So I was kind of scared about him at 65th overall ADP. That tells you all you need to know at his 45th overall price. I currently have him off as my 71st ranked player. The fact that he's going legitimately over 2 rounds ahead of where I currently ranked, I'm out. Like,
yeah,
Shark Tank right now.
The boom is there, right? Like, weekly basis, season, like, it's there. But like, the problem is how likely are the Seahawks to be a pass heavy team? Very unlikely, right? So like that boom factor, the only way that they can get to that kind of pass volume is if their defense is just brutal. And a Bobby Wagner led defense is not going to be the worst defense in the league. It's just not. It's going to be a defense that's league average. They've been a league average defense for the last, 4 years or so, since Tyler Lockett's really been fantasy relevant. And in home leagues, like, this is a big name player, right? He's attached to a good quarterback. He's going to go high in drafts, and same goes for Metcalf. they're not going to be guys that fall because people are worried about inconsistency. They're just going to see the big name attached to a good quarterback and take them in the third, fourth round, second round for DK Metcalf. And at that price, I'm not in. I'd rather take Keenan Allen over Metcalf. I'd rather take Michael Thomas. I'd rather take Amari Cooper. I'd rather take Mike Evans even than DK Metcalf. And then over Tyler Lockett, the guys that he's going around, I'd rather take Deontay Johnson. I'd rather take Brandon Ayuk. I'd rather take all of these guys because I believe in their ability to be consistent, and they still have the same ceiling that Lockett has.
Again, I'd probably take Metcalf over CeeDee Lamb, but are we at all shocked if they finish the season basically back-to-back in terms of finish?
Probably not.
I wouldn't. And again, I don't want to sound like a Cowboys truther in saying that, but that just kind of goes to show you the differences in terms of the overall passing offense. Cowboys should be one of the highest overall passing output teams in the league. Seahawks probably nearing the bottom. So it's scary because he's currently, again, going off the board. DK Metcalf being early third. And as you mentioned, ridiculous. 45th overall for Tyler Lockett. If you're spending the 45th overall pick on Tyler Lockett, please put me in your leagues because I want to just take your money.
One thing I would like to suggest is that we're using Underdog ADP, right? It is best ball league, right? So you don't have to decide when to just start Tyler Lockett. So that might skew it a little bit. But either way, I think in a home league that which most of our audience would be playing in, he's going to be a top 50 pick or at least close to that. And at that point, it's a fourth, fifth round pick that you're spending on him. He's probably your wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 at minimum. And at that point, I'm just out. I'd rather take a lot of the other guys going in that range. Speaking of one of the guys going in that range, who actually is going 65th overall. This is probably what you were looking at before, but yeah. Chase Claypool is the next guy that we're going to talk about as a boomer bust option. I think we all know what the boom is, right? He's wide receiver 29 overall in ADP, 65th overall. The boom is courtesy of our good friend Ron Stewart. He put out a thread the other day talking about targeting sophomore wide receivers. And his conclusion basically was that the fact that Chase Claypool was able to finish as a wide receiver 3 in his rookie season. And another thing that is so overlooked about Chase Claypool's ability to finish as a wide receiver 3 is the fact that he did it with Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson already on the team. Like, none of them missed time. They didn't get injured. The fact that Chase Claypool was able to come out and command that kind of target share and beat out James Washington right away is so impressive. And people, like Ron says in his thread, people can make every excuse that they want. What about Chase Claypool's target competition with Juju and Deontay? What about the quarterback play? The bottom line is that when you perform at that level as a rookie, you show that talent to be the elite level player, elite level fantasy wide receiver that we want. And in that thread, he references a second-year breakout wide receivers article that Sean Siegel wrote for RotoViz a couple years ago. And he talks about the breakout rates of wide receivers in their second year. And if they do it, it's basically a launch pad to fantasy success for the remainder of their career. Basically, if they can do it by year 2, it's curtains. They're going to be an elite fantasy asset, basically. And you can see on this chart right here, breakout rate by NFL experience. Number 2 is the year 2 of their career, right? That's the highest rate of breakout for their career. And Chase Claypool, of course, is going into his second year. And we know how talented Claypool is. If you look at his reception perception last year, you can see that he won on his routes at an above average rate, a green rate, in pretty much all of his routes except for the post and the dig, which ironically are probably routes that people would assume he'd win at, right? Because he has the speed and the size. When you look at his actual route tree, which is on the right there, he only ran 9 routes was the only deep route that he actually ran at a high rate. 27%. He ran a lot of slants and curls and outs and screen passes as well. Like, he was involved on all 3 areas of the field. He wasn't just a deep threat for Ben Roethlisberger, and I would assume that's the biggest concern people have with Chase Claypool is that Ben isn't the same passer that he used to be, and he's not going to be as efficient on deep routes. But when you see the success rates of Chase Claypool, you can just see that this guy won at all 3 levels of the field: man, zone, press, short, deep, intermediate. Didn't matter. He was good at all 3 levels of the field. And in reception perception, Matt Harmon himself drawed complete and direct parallels to DK Metcalf's rookie year. That was the first thing he said in the write-up for Chase Claypool. He was like, I see so many similarities with DK Metcalf as a rookie and Chase Claypool as a rookie. When you have double-digit touchdowns in your rookie season, when you're top 10 in hog rate, which is basically how many times you're being targeted on the routes that you're running, top 10 in air yards, and top 5 in unrealized air yards. He doesn't just run go routes. He ran a full route tree. The bust factor, right? There's definitely a bust factor, or else he would just be a breakout candidate, and he probably still will be for us. But the bust factor is if Ben is completely cooked, right? If Ben is completely cooked, this offense is going to suffer. The other bust factor is, do they shift to more of a run-heavy approach, right? They brought in Najee Harris in the first round. They have a new offensive coordinator who runs a more Kyle Shanahan Rams type of system. And those teams, generally speaking, don't throw the ball at a high clip like the Steelers have the past couple of years. And the Steelers' offensive line is going to hinder the offense's efficiency as a whole to some extent as well. So that's where the bust factor comes in with Chase Claypool. But in my opinion, his ADP of 65th overall, his 5th, 6th round pick that you have to pick him as, it's worth the risk in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm glad you drew the parallels to DK Metcalf. Actually, in the sophomore breakout video I did about a month ago, I talked about it. If you're comparing the efficiencies, you mentioned reception perception, 74th, 64th, and 80th percentile, comparatively to what DK Metcalf did as a first-year receiver. His numbers were 85th, 77th, and 79th. So very similar in terms of their overall win rates. But guess what? DK Metcalf in his second year, once he broke out, ended up increasing those numbers, get this, to the 88th and 94th percentile against man and against press. If Chase Claypool takes that type of leap as a player, again, we mentioned Metcalf being a riskier option at the early third. If he was going in the range of where Chase Claypool is now, guess what? I'd have 100% ownership of DK Metcalf. Maybe we're seeing the next DK Metcalf with Chase Claypool, which as a result, I'm absolutely all in on this current ADP. I mean, we're still talking about a guy you mentioned can do it at all three levels, but that 30.1% deep target percentage actually ranked first amongst wide receivers with 100 plus targets last year. And you mentioned 27% of his routes run on the 9 route. If Ben isn't completely cooked and can still, get the ball to his 6'4", 220-pound, 4'4" wide receiver down the field, we could be talking about a guy that's nearing that 18 yards per reception, 10 touchdown range. And if he is doing that, he's going to win leagues. But obviously, again, as you mentioned, the downside being after they started 11-0, his points per game in the last 6 weeks dropped from 15.6 PPR points per game to 9.97, despite his targets actually going up by 0.8 per game. So basically, he's getting targeted more, but because Ben was just completely different as a quarterback, completely deteriorated, he wasn't producing. So we've yet to see what Chase Claypool is going to be for the majority of a 2021 season. But if Ben can even just, can someone just tape a stick on his elbow to make sure it can stay up? Please. Or I'll give him my elbow just to make sure that fucking Chase Claypool can break out, because that is how talented Mapletron is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you have to look at too with Chase Claypool is that the fact that Ben has always been a no risk it, no biscuit type of quarterback, right? Whether Ben can do it or not, he's still going to push the ball downfield. And Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster are great short and intermediate targets, but they don't get downfield targets like Chase Claypool does. Sure, they're probably Chase Claypool, I'll bet you right now, is at the top of the league again in unrealized air yards next year, but at least he's going to get downfield targets. And he's a talented enough player that even if they're off target a little bit, he should be able to come down with them for the most part and be that guy that we want him to be in fantasy and be the next DK Metcalf. I think he absolutely has that type of potential. And at his price, he's worth that boomer bust risk, in my opinion, because he's going to be your wide receiver 3, your wide receiver 4, your flex option. And you're already going to have, 3 running backs, 2 running backs, and 4 wide receivers already on your team.
Yeah, the one thing I'm just going to close off on Chase Claypool is you better enjoy him in our listener league, because that's going to be a fun little piece for your championship win now type of team. But anyways, let's get on to the final piece. We're going to be talking about a rookie. Yes, I know. Another rookie. We already talked about Jamar Chase. What the heck is going on here? But guess what? It's well worth the risk, or well worth the wait, because we're going to be talking about Kyle Pitts, tight end from the Atlanta Falcons, currently going off the board as the tight end for 44th overall in ADP. What? A rookie top 4 in his position? How was that the case, Bush? Take it away. Start it off.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts is going to be a divisive topic all summer for people, because the nerds that didn't watch any film are going to talk about how Kyle Pitts is not going to break the mold, because no rookie tight end has ever finished in the top 5 of tight ends that year. But the problem is that no rookie tight end has ever been Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts was the 4th overall pick. They passed on a franchise quarterback for a tight end because Kyle Pitts is that special. Arthur Smith called him a gold jacket type of player. That's the type of prospect that we're talking about here. We're talking about Vernon Davis level prospect. We're talking about better than TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant a couple years ago, better than OJ Howard a couple years ago. This guy is, quite frankly, built different. That's the type of prospect that we're talking about here. And in that 4th round, he's obviously a huge risk, right? You're talking about a round where you're passing on foundational pieces, right? You're passing on guys like I don't know, like probably Terry McLaurin's and Amari Cooper's are already off the board, but that next tier of wide receivers, the Deontay Johnsons, apparently the Tyler Lockett's, like that's what we're talking about here. And Kyle Pitts is a guy that can absolutely return value on his pick, right? He can reach that elite level production that George Kittle and Travis Kelce and Darren Waller put up. And we could be talking about a big 4 this time next year instead of a big 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, when you're talking about Kyle Pitts, let's just break down the situation real quick because we'll get into the Julio Jones stuff in a second, but just talk about the player himself. Okay. The hype is absolutely real. You mentioned he is a generational tight end prospect. As good as Vernon Davis was, we're talking about probably the best tight end prospect of the last 20 years prior to Pitts. I think Pitts is a better prospect coming in. Again, we're talking about a guy, 99th percentile athlete at the position, ran a 4.4 at like 265 pounds, which is just insane. And he produced like a madman in college, 770 yards and 12 touchdowns in only 8 games played as a true junior. Yes, you heard that correctly. He was doing that at fucking 20 years old in the SEC, dominating. Fuck, J.C. Horn had to cover him during the South Carolina game, for crying out loud. A top 10 pick a corner had to be allocated to Kyle Pitts because that's how damn special this kid is. He put up the phenomenal tape. He put up the phenomenal requisite athletic testing and lands in a situation where he was the 4th overall pick, highest ever used on a tight end, and replacing one of the best receivers of all time in terms of vacated production. And we're talking about Julio Jones last year, who put up 7.6 targets per game. There is so much opportunity for Kyle Pitts to step in and immediately be a 95, 100, maybe 100+ target tight end as a rookie. And if he's doing that, he is not only well worth that 4th overall pick at the tight end position. We could be talking about a guy who, again, we see Kittle and Waller currently going on that 2-3 turn. Pitts can very well be in that situation next year. So the upside is he wins you leagues at his current 4 or 5 type of ADP. The downside being, obviously, if you're going to be a nerd about it and you want to point to the historical data, Hawkinson was a very good prospect. What happened to him? Even though the fact that he was 5th on his team in targets. Is there really a plausible scenario where Kyle Pitts isn't at minimum 3rd on this team in targets? If you want to hype up Russell Gage, which I wouldn't even do that.
No,
absolutely not.
There totally isn't. And the thing with Kyle Pitts is the tight end 4 ADP doesn't worry me, right? Like tight end 4 is viable. I think he should be tight end 4, tight end 5 at minimum in ADP. It's the 44th overall. Like that part is the part that makes me not want to pick Kyle Pitts because of the running backs and the wide receivers that you're going to be passing on for him. And even the quarterbacks, man. Like I have Lamar Jackson rated higher than Kyle Pitts in terms of like my overall rankings. And could I feasibly say that I would rather have Kyle Pitts on my team than Lamar Jackson? No, I can't. Even though Kyle Pitts definitely has a chance to be one of those elite advantages at his position, I think Lamar Jackson has every chance to do that as well. So the wide receivers, the running backs, some of the quarterbacks that you're passing on, I can't do it with Kyle Pitts. I would rather see him go in the 60, 65th overall kind of range where you're deciding between a Chase Claypool and a Kyle Pitts. Like at that point, I think it's worth it, but the 44th overall is a little bit early for me. And again, we're using Underdog ADP. It's really sharp. It's really, smart, informed fantasy players using this. If you're playing in a home league, there's a chance that your league mates don't know how good Kyle Pitts is, right? And he might be tight end 6 off the board behind Hawkinson, behind Andrews, and he might be going at the 70th, 80th overall pick. And at that point, it's a smash, right? But if you're talking about we're using the ADP currently as the sharp ADP, I'm assuming if you're listening to this show, you're probably playing on Underdog drafts or you're in leagues with very dedicated fantasy players who know who Kyle Pitts is. So that 44th overall ADP is a little high for me. I'd rather, if it's 55th, 60th overall, that's where I'm in on Kyle Pitts. But the bust factor of him being a tight end, a rookie tight end, is really real.
That's fair. Where do you think I have him ranked right now?
I would assume you have him like 48 or something like that.
His ADP is 44. I have him ranked right at 44. So I think it's the perfect placing for him. Yeah. Like, again, I'm a lot more, to be fair, I'm a much more tight end advocate than Corey is. I'm higher on Travis Kelce, George Kittle, and Waller as well. So if you're if you're comparing them from a proportional standpoint, my 44 is basically similar to your 60 regardless. So it makes sense why there's a little bit of a divide here, but regardless. Yeah. So
and I have him at 58. And here's the guys that I'm deciding between in terms of my own rankings. I have Kyle Pitts right behind Mike Davis in my rankings, right? Like his teammate, Mike Davis. So we're talking about a running back that's projected a lot of volume, but I have a lot of question marks in terms of you know, the situation, his talent, offensive line, all that stuff. I have him ahead of guys like Myles Gaskin, Kareem Hunt, Chase Claypool, Damian Harris, Robbie Anderson. Like, that's where I'm comfortable taking the Kyle Pitts risk. I am not comfortable where I have, he's at 44 overall in ADP. Right now at 44, I have Miles Sanders. I have Robert Woods. I have Kenny Golladay. I have Patrick Mahomes. I have Brandon Ayuk. Like, those guys, to me, are a lot safer of projections than what Kyle Pitts offers.
Yep, that's absolutely fair. So anyways, if you guys have made it this far in the video and you've enjoyed it thus far, make sure you go hit that subscribe button. As always, we're on that road to 5K. We mentioned it before we got into the video. And if you made it this far, comment down below. Here comes the boom, because obviously we're in the boom bust video, baby. But anyways, we will see you back tomorrow for some dynasty decisions, your guys' favorite series. Peace out, y'all.
Why you need the money?